We rely on GPS, smartphones, and constant surveillance to navigate our daily lives. We operate on the baseline assumption that every inch of our world is accurately mapped, monitored, and thoroughly understood. But if you drive far enough past the city limits, that grid begins to thin out. You reach places like a secluded farmhouse surrounded by hundreds of acres of empty fields, a solitary cabin sitting off-season on a freezing, expansive lake, a remote corner of a massive wilderness campground. These are locations where people, a lifelong skeptic, a father who had camped his entire life, and a man who openly mocked UFO videos, suddenly encountered events that defied the known laws of physics. When you look closely at their accounts, these aren't random ghost stories. They follow a distinct, observable pattern, a shared, sequential taxonomy of an encounter. Stepping outside the radius of cell towers and civilization removes the safety net of shared reality. It exposes you to an environment where a completely different set of physical laws takes over. The encounter almost always begins with sensory disruption, specifically auditory intrusions that have no physical source. At the farmhouse, a couple was jolted awake by an earth-shaking low-bass blare. It sounded like an enormous boat horn, violently vibrating the glasses in the china cabinet, even though they were miles from any water. Deep in the wilderness campground, a father out for a late-night walk heard something similarly unnatural. It was a continuous, synthetic, pulsating frequency, a distinct, repetitive vocalization echoing through the pitch-black trees. This diagram illustrates what researchers call the Oz factor. As the father tracked that pulsating noise, the layered sounds of the natural forest, the rustling wind, the insects, snapped to a flat line. The environment went dead quiet, as if muted. Animals recognized this environmental shift instantly. At the lake house, a black lab that normally lived to be outdoors walked to the door, whimpered, and refused to cross the threshold into the dark. This sudden sensory drop-off creates a targeted isolation chamber. It cuts the witness off from the natural environment, locking them in right before the visual anomalies begin to manifest. Once the environment is muted, the phenomena cross into the visual spectrum, frequently breaking basic anatomical rules. In that muted forest, the father turned to see an abnormally tall, skinny shadow figure. It didn't walk, it stood hunched over, moving with a rhythmic sway. At the freezing lake, the visual phenomena took a geometric form. Swarms of distinct light orbs appeared on the distant horizon, darting around in erratic, non-ballistic trajectories that drone technology cannot replicate. On the second night, those chaotic orbs slowed down. They moved with deliberate precision across the water, converging and melting into one massive, intensely bright, hovering sphere before dipping out of sight. Sometimes the visual anomalies scale up to encompass the entire landscape. Outside the farmhouse, a silent, lightning-like flash, powerful enough to illuminate the entire yard, erupted out of nowhere without a single storm cloud in the sky. Witnessing these biological and geometric anomalies forces the human brain into immediate panic. It is desperately trying to process raw visual data that contradicts every learned law of nature. The final phase of an encounter is the breach. This is the moment the phenomena escalate from distant, passive observation to a direct, physical intrusion into the witness's personal space. At the farmhouse, an incomprehensible whispering language surrounded the property, while the couple's cell and Wi-Fi networks were suddenly suppressed. Then, in absolute synchronization, the physically locked front and side doors violently blew open at the exact same moment. At the lake cabin, the floating lights aggressively surged toward the shoreline, accompanied by a loud fluorescent humming noise. They shot directly at the house, the nearby trees, and the water, swarming the structure like a targeted strike. Look at this timeline of the camper's experience. He had a brief standoff with the entity before returning to his RV. He thought he was gone for a few minutes. Instead, the breach targeted his perception of time, deleting an entire hour. The breach phase strips away any remaining illusion of safety. It proves that human boundaries, whether they are physical deadbolts on a door or the linear ticking of a clock, offer no protection against these forces. Then, as quickly as it peaks, the event ends. The environment snaps back to normal. In the woods, the rustling wind immediately returned to the trees. At the farmhouse, The couple's smartphones simultaneously lit up with a flood of notifications as the cellular grid reappeared. What is left behind is a chilling absence of proof. When police arrived at the farmhouse, they found the yard soaked with wet mud, yet right outside the violently opened doors, the ground was perfectly smooth. There wasn't a single footprint. The morning after the lake house was swarmed by shooting orbs, the man checked his property. Despite the intensity of the light strike, he found zero physical damage, no burn marks, and no structural impact anywhere on the cabin. This total lack of forensic evidence acts as a secondary psychological trauma. The encounter weaponizes the witness's own rational mind against them, leaving them to question their own memory of the night. The real terror of these events is the isolating reality of returning to a society that demands hard physical proof for an event that appears engineered to leave none behind. All three of these individuals entered their respective wildernesses as grounded, rational adults. They relied on logic and empirical evidence to make sense of their daily lives. But surviving this specific sequence, the sensory mute, the physical impossibilities, and the breach of safe spaces, shattered those assumptions. Their trust in reality was dismantled over the course of a single night. Modern technology has illuminated massive stretches of our everyday world, making us feel in control. Yet true, logic-breaking mysteries still command the dark, quiet corners of the map, simply waiting for us to wander out of range.